Hey, you lucky libertarians, welcome to another edition, and this time a really special edition of the Scottish Liberty Podcast with me, Tom Laird.
And me, Antony.
And show we have former US Marine libertarian activist, author, podcaster, broadcaster, and dare I say, we've got that.
Oh, they can't hear it.
Okay. Some actor. You're not currently incarcerated, Adam, no?
Only in the United Soviet States of America. I think they built a wall to keep us in.
And prospective. Okay, dear. But prospective presidential candidate, is that still on to go ahead with that?
Yes, we are on a 68-city national tour right now. We happen to be in Tallahassee, Florida. And we've been touring the country recruiting delegates for Kokesh for president. Although right now it's Kokesh for not president because we're not filing FEC paperwork yet. But it's also much more accurate to say that I'm running for not president because I'm running on the platform of the immediate dissolution of the entire United States federal government, going in as a bankruptcy agent, declaring it of no authority whatsoever, resigning from the presidency to become custodian of the federal government for the purpose of carrying out this preordained process that people are going to be able to vote for. Really, what we're doing is turning the United States presidential election into a referendum on whether or not the federal government itself should be allowed to continue to exist.
Small, man. Start off small. That's maybe once you've won that one, you can set your sights. Dissolution of world of all of.
But yeah, it's a good start. So how are you going to go about it?
Exactly.
Are you going to run as an independent candidate then, or are you going to run as a Republican candidate? How does that work? Independent.
Oh, I'll be running as a libertarian. I'm a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party, and it's the only one that I can say that about, of course. I ran as a Republican when Ron Paul endorsed me for Congress in 2010 as part of the Ron Paul incursion into the Republican Party, which I think has proven to be a failed strategy, and I think the future of freedom is in the Libertarian Party. So what we're doing right now is getting people organized for the 2018 National Convention because we want to change the direction of the party for the new libertarian strategy of localization, which is the everybody gets what they want strategy. You get government localized down to the community level. Everybody gets what they want. You want a community organized with your values, as long as you're not forcing them on anybody else, you can have that in your community. So we want to introduce a plank into the Libertarian Party platform, and we might, there's some old language that's been used before that said we support the elimination or reduction of all government wherever possible. We just want to add one word to that, localization, because I think there's really nothing more unlibertarian or anti-freedom that you can say than I want to be president of the United States. I want to take over this whole area, this territory. I want to be in charge of this violent entity and impose my libertarian ideas on the entire country, as opposed to what we're saying, which is I'm going to throw the ring in the fire. We don't need to continue the system anymore. It shouldn't be allowed to exist at all. No one should be president. When we have government at the states as opposed to the federal level, everybody has government that's a lot more in line with their values, their needs, and their communities. And I think this is really just the first step of getting to an ideal peaceful, voluntary, libertarian social order of small, localized governments, although at that point, I would not call them government because they're essentially voluntary at that point, but that you get government localized down to the community level. In the United States, we get rid of the federal government, we get rid of the state governments, we get government down to the county level. We're basically done. We have a great system of subsidiarity here and an American tradition of leading the world forward in freedom by overthrowing the biggest empire the world has ever known. Of course, in the first American Revolution, it was the British Empire, and now in the final revolution, final American Revolution, it is the American people overthrowing the American Empire. And it is a really exciting time to be alive because people are ready for this. People are like, you know, you had the Scottish independent vote you have right now in Catalonia and Kurdistan, very strong independence movements making headlines. In the United States, there are a lot of states, even California now, that would rather be independent than forced into the Union. Union. And if we can basically all secede at the same time, then everybody gets a much greater fair share of how things come out in that process. And I think putting together a deliberate, peaceful, orderly, responsible way of dissolving the United States federal government is really the only way that we achieve our goals in a sustainable manner. What we're talking about is not revolutionary so much as evolutionary.
Right.
Okay.
And I think in America there is a particular problem. We have two largely ideological voting blocks, where and you have, say, Republicans trying, especially Bible Belt strain, trying to impose their values on who can get married to who, and sort of drug wars. They are more hawkish on foreign policy, so and traditionally they've been more anti-civil. And the liberals who want to impose all of these economics and their views on, say, abortion or whatever on states where those views are unpopular. So the appetite, there may be for some people get more low that trying to ram their views down everyone else's throats at gunpoint. I'm actually interested in knowing what it's been like for you to get out and talk to like random people while you're touring, and ever not in the libertarian movement yet, when you've been getting out there, and what is that like?
Yeah, it's been awesome, and sometimes I think we're just this is going to be way easier than any of us thought. You know, that we've already won in the sense that we've already achieved the fundamental paradigm shift of people, thanks to the internet, no longer feeling like we're bound by tradition, that we have to be this way because it's always been this way, that America has to be united under one government to be united in American values. These silly lines drawn on a map by politicians in circumstance of history that don't represent us no longer hold any weight. And so when I get out, and this is one of the things I love most about doing a tour like this, is talking to non-libertarians. And this tour has been kind of a nightmare of mechanical issues. So I like to say that we talk to a lot of mechanics. That's our, you know, our nice slice of blue collar America on this tour that we've been talking to a lot. And they say, you know, when they see the freedom logo, I have the big freedom logos all over our vehicle, and they'll say, "What's freedom?" And I say, well, it's this book that I wrote when I was in jail for civil disobedience. It's banned in jails now because it's about how we create a more peaceful, productive, and harmonious world by dissolving government altogether. That's the philosophy at the heart of this, right? And normally the response is, but what?
How will you stop monopolies without government? When we were out, that was the most common questions we got asked. I don't know about you.
Well, you know, in the United States, it's, but without a military, who's going to keep us safe? And it's, I mean, it's obviously based on a false premise, you know, because having a military makes us less safe in every way imaginable. But when it comes to monopolies, I mean, it just, do you really want to be able to this is an important part of the strategic shift that I'm advocating for right now within the libertarian movement, relates to how you would answer that question. Because if we make this a debate club, we're never going to be a political force. And if you want to debate, you know, your ideals, your ideology, you'll be arguing with people forever. And that's a losing game. You know, even if you're right, you can win battles, and it makes it harder to win the war. But if you say, hey, it's about localization, it's, well, hey, you want to stop monopolies from having the, you know, being able to force themselves on you and your community, right? So, hey, let's get government down to the local level where you guys get to control what is an appropriate business to be doing business in your community, rather than having the federal government do it, being everybody forced into this one-size-fits-all solution. And to go back about the what you were talking about, the polarization right now, let's imagine literally half the country is Democrat and half is Republican. We know that's not true, because most don't fit into either category. Most are independent or libertarian leaning, right, or moderate or whatever. It's really more like, you know, a quarter of the country is Democrat and a quarter of the country is Republican, but they're the ones that vote the most. Most independents, libertarian types, you know, are smart enough to know that voting is usually a waste of your time. So, but among these Democrats and Republicans, a lot of them would rather have a democratic state or republican state than to be forced into a system that ties them to each other where they have to fight. And this is one amazing opportunity that we have with this strategy of vote swapping. You know, you can imagine the typical like husband-wife scenario where one's a Republican, one's a Democrat, and they go out and vote and their votes cancel each other out, right? But both of them would rather have a libertarian. Both of them would rather have someone who respects their individual rights. Or you look at a state, you know, you have one state voting Republican, one state voting Democrat, because they want their state to be organized a certain way, and they're stuck in this thinking that we have to force us all under one system, that America has to be united under one government. And frankly, that in and of itself is anti-American. The most American thing we can do right now to live up to the tradition of our founders and the legacy of what Americanism should be is to come up with a solution as big as the problem and dissolve the entire federal government.
Okay, I mean that's quite, especially when, I mean, I have a saying, you know, that I think it comes from a science fiction book that I wrote, which is like you're trying to, people's head of squares that they can't see the circles that you're trying to draw them. And I just wondered, what was for you from being a nominal libertarian? I think I heard your podcast that, you know, you knew this word libertarian and you thought you were a libertarian and you went along with it. But when did that transition from being a nominal libertarian to an actual libertarian and in effect an anarcho-capitalist? What was that journey? How did that happen? When did that happen?
I'm not sure how you're using the terminology here,
Okay.
because I became a libertarian. I became a lifetime member of the Libertarian Party in 2004 when I got back from Iraq. It was the first time I could actually afford it. But, you know, libertarian can mean two different things, obviously. Well, I mean, it can mean a lot of different things. And really, because it's such a, I mean, if you define it as someone who believes in the doctrine of free will, which is one of the dictionary definitions of libertarian, lots of people can interpret that in different ways. Obviously, there's the capital L libertarian, that is the person who identifies with the Libertarian Party. And I actually was a capital L libertarian before I was a small L libertarian. And my gateway to this message was in high school. At some point, they said, "Do you want to be a Republican or Democrat?" And I was like, wait, I have to be lame? Are you really? I don't have a choice here. This is America, right? There's got to be a way to opt out. And they said, well, there's these libertarians over here, these crazy people who like to be left alone, and they believe in this, you know, socially liberal, fiscally conservative. And I was like, yeah, leave me alone. That's me, because I was a punk kid. But there's a reason that I'm so passionate now about communicating the message of libertarianism, not as a political message. I mean, I think we use politics to create practical platforms, to create practical policy, and we use it to spread a message. But the message itself is not political. It is anti-political. It is an ethical message. It is self-ownership and voluntarism and the non-aggression principle. And the reason this is so important to me is that getting the political version of libertarianism did not stop me from enlisting in the Marine Corps. It did not stop me from volunteering to go to Iraq in a war of aggression based on lies. It didn't stop me from torturing people in Fallujah. And I think it's the message of ethics, not the message of politics, that ultimately is what's going to change the world. So it wasn't until well after that, I suppose, I became a big L libertarian in high school. Then I joined Iraq Veterans Against the War, you know, after I got out of college, after I got out of the Marine Corps. And it wasn't until 2010 when I was running for Congress in New Mexico that I listened to the audiobook of Ethics for Liberty, or Ethics of Liberty by Murray Rothbard. And that's what made me a small L libertarian, or a voluntarist, anarcho-capitalist, whatever word you want to describe it. Although I got to say, as much as I love Murray Rothbard, as much as he is really the intellectual godfather of the modern freedom movement, to coin the word anarcho-capitalism is like, let's take the two worst, most hated words that we could possibly use to describe what we're talking about and cram them together into one word that's guaranteed to piss off everybody. So if we're going to use the word anarcho-capitalist, we have to be clear that by anarcho, we mean anarchists in the sense of a world with no rulers. So if you have any government in that system, it has to be voluntary. And when we say capitalist, we mean that you own yourself. You own your body and your mind and the product of your labor. And if you choose to engage in a socialist or communal, whatever kind of system based on that, it still has to be based on your belief that you are getting value out of that, out of your voluntary exchange with that, which makes it capitalist. Not we want big corporations. I mean, yes, that can happen. Not that we want any, great concentrations of wealth or power or banking system, but anarcho-capitalist, if it means the same thing, voluntarist, libertarian, it's about self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, and a world of non-violence.
Yeah, because a lot of people obviously think what we have now is capitalism, and when people say capitalism, they mean what we have now. So anarcho-capitalism just sounds like a worse version of what we have now. I've never been keen on the term. I would personally prefer to use voluntarist, but because no one knows what a voluntarist is, I usually just say I'm either a libertarian or an anarchist. Now, one of the problems with the government, and it comes back to one of the benefits of localism, is when you have this two-party system with everyone else trying to cram down each other's throats, while they're discussing over gay marriage, abortion, and all these ideological differences, they can get away with basically being the same on all the bad shit, like cracking down on civil liberties, less economic freedom,
war on drugs,
violence overseas, and says no taxation. You have in your book a chapter on a brief history bucket. How did we come to be in a position where we have this abomination, which everyone just accepts as a basic fact of life? I mean, government have killed maybe coming up to 500 million of their own people in the 20th century, and about as many of each other's people in war. So that's almost a billion. Standards of living by not allowing the prices of goods and services to fall in a free market. And yet everyone thinks that this is something that's necessary. Tell us a bit about the brief history of the government racket.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because it's a really important thing that I think differentiates my worldview from a lot of libertarians, or I think it's something that I formed with a particular eye to where is this going in the future, and having to then look back into the past to find dynamics. So if I look to the future and I say, well, are we going to be a more libertarian or less libertarian, more free, more peaceful society, or is it possible that we could get worse? I have to look at the trends. And the most important one to me is the deaths by violence. And if you look at human history, we are living in the most peaceful times in human history ever. And this is not my observation. This is academically demonstrated by Professor Steven Pinker at Harvard, who gave a great TED Talk on the subject and has written a number of books. And he proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that across the globe, you are less likely today than ever before to be subject to violence at the hands of another human being. And when you understand the relationship with that and freedom, that is a beautiful thing to celebrate. That's like, that makes me want to say, go team people. This is the course of human progress, to be more harmonious, to be more peaceful, to be more cooperative. And so when I look to the future with that, I can't imagine that trend won't continue. But the way that you raise that question raises the idea that we've come to this modern era of big government. And it's true, and you point out all those statistics about the numbers of deaths, but still the governments before that proportionally, and the people who died in war was more than that. So while we've had these concentrated effects of the modern war era of World War I, World War II, the phenomena that happened on that scale, still overall globally violence is down. And it's kind of something you have to wrap your head around. You have to do the numbers to really have confidence in this. But to realize that, yes, even with these modern aberrations of large-scale war, it's still on the decline. And you look to today, the worst kinds of wars that governments can get away with are these little proxy wars, like throughout the Middle East, Iraq, Afghanistan, global war on terror, Syria, all the different countries that were involved in the Arab Spring. So when I look at that, when I take that view of history, I see that we're coming to a more free time. Now, you might look at the size of government and say, oh, well, gee, Adam, your model doesn't really hold up because government has just grown exponentially and spending and, you know, over the last few hundred years of modern technological development. And in, you know, one of the theories Steven Pinker credits with the decline in violence is government. And as a libertarian, I want to go, no, you know, you can't give government credit for anything. But you can, in the sense that it's taken a monopoly on functions that society has been getting better at and will do better without government. But that the accountability, government has served as a mechanism of accountability. I think that's an important thing. Of course, we'd have better accountability without government, but government with modern technology, you know, serving people, catching murderers, things like that, at least is better than pre-technology society where people could get away with violent crimes on a regular basis without that kind of accountability. And again, this is something that Steven Pinker very convincingly academically makes the case for. So if my model is going to hold true, I have to be able to address this. So I would ask, is big government always worse than small government? And of course, as libertarians, we're inclined to say, yes, of course, big government is always worse than small government, but it's not, and I can prove it. And this is really important to understanding what is the metric by which we measure government versus freedom. So would you rather have a society where government is huge, half of the population works for government, but they only do things that are legitimate services. They only do things that the market would provide. They pretty much respect people's rights. They're peaceful. The only things they do that are violent essentially are the minimal necessary to maintain their monopoly on those big services, those major parts of the economy, but they still run them in a way that provide more or less what the market would. Or would you rather have a government that's 1% of the population, but murders every firstborn child? You see where I'm going with this? And what the conclusion I come to from this little thought exercise is that the metric of the evil of government is not its size, but how much it violently removes us from our natural state of harmony that we would have without it. So while, yes, governments have grown in size, we are still living, I believe, in the most peaceful and therefore the most free times in human history. Yes, 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. You can measure this in different ways, on different dimensions, in different places, at different times, but I'm very confident in the overall trend that we are working towards a more free world.
I'd just like to comment on the Go Team people. Actually, if you look at it, we don't take part of the planet, we have these war outfits. On the other hand, I think we're really not designed by nature to be in a global village. Like, we're designed to be in communities of up to maybe 300 people. So it's amazing that we're actually doing as well in many ways, given that nature hasn't given us the equipment to deal with these kinds of situations. And I think it would be right to say there was a time in history where homicide was the cause of death for people. So there's certainly a lot to celebrate, and it's easy to focus on the bad, but certainly technology and with a little innovation, I think the private sector grow the corrupt education system on online universities that are much better than Ivy League universities and cost and Uber, but self-driving Ubers will get rid of a lot of environmental damage and this and that. Sorry?
Flying Ubers.
Self-flying Ubers is what we have by now if it wasn't for government.
Self-flying Uber. Yeah, if it wasn't for government, who knows, we could be...
Why did they build all those roads?
Well, you know, on the tour here, I like to make a joke about how I built a road on my property in Arizona because it didn't connect to any existing roads. So we're going to name my road that was built without government. We're going to see this on a street sign soon here. Ma Road.
Excellent.
So my address is One Road.
That's awesome.
So I'm going to read out a question, actually, one of one of our viewers has put to us, called David Cal, and his question to you, Adam, is I guess it's probably to do with your activism. He says, what do you think is the most efficient, respectful, and effective deprogramming tactic when conversing with a person in the military, law enforcement, minutes and even seconds to get them to understand not fight, or they're not protecting you, and maybe, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question, because people who have
freedom.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because there are a lot of people in the, you know, in the employment of government, in the enforcement class,
yeah,
who have that stronger emotional attachment that you have to overcome. But I wouldn't really single them out.
Sure.
I don't think you can say there's a strategy for talking to soldiers and a strategy for talking to cops, and then the strategy for talking to Marines like myself is, you know, not give them any crayons to eat. But when you're talking about people who are working for the government, it's not much different than, you know, someone who worked for government 20 years and retired. It's not much different from someone who's a family member who, you know, maybe had a police officer family member killed in the line of duty, you know, or just a relative in the military, or a family tradition of being in the military. And it's really about judging the individual. And I think it's much more important to convert someone to free thought, to thinking for themselves, to forming a worldview based on their own reason and logic, rather than accepting a worldview that has been handed to them by government or some other authority. And if you can make someone a free thinker, it's more important than making them a libertarian, because if they're thinking for themselves, they'll become a libertarian eventually. So when you're talking to someone like that, I think you just have to be particularly sensitive to what is their emotional attachment. But I would remind you that, this is my third national tour like this, and everywhere I go, I ask people, how did you wake up? And I'd like to think I have one of the best bodies of at least anecdotal data as to how people become libertarians. And generally, it doesn't happen from a conversation. So that's really important, that just to understand that you're not going to yell at someone in a bar loud enough to make them a libertarian. It's not going to happen. Very few people have said, well, I just had this buddy and we sat down one day and we talked about it, and he was like, you should be a libertarian. And I was like, oh yeah, you're right. You know, I've never heard that story. And so it's important.
I think I know of that, Adam. You don't yell at people in the pub.
Like, yeah, right.
That's one for me.
So it's important to recognize that it's a deeply personal process of getting rid of that worldview that's forced on us to one based on our own thinking. So that's why I wrote my book, Freedom. It's free in every digital format possible, including audiobook. I think if you can get someone like that to read a book, if you're close to them, you know, if you can say, hey, look, can you do me a favor? If they're a family member of yours, can you take 15 minutes to just read the first chapter of this book, which lays out this philosophy that I believe in, that's very important to me? And if they say, no, I can't take 15 minutes for you, screw that, you know, then maybe you shouldn't be too involved with them. But really, when you're talking to someone who has that high emotional attachment, it's often hard to get them to even consider a worldview that's different, and it's hard to get them to even engage in conversation that challenges their worldview. And that's why I think asking someone to read a book or an article or something, because it has to happen on their own time. You know, when we engage in conversation, we're kind of programmed to defend our worldview. You know, we have confirmation bias. All of these things that keep us in an irrational worldview are these walls that are up in conversation that we feel like we have to defend. And if you want to get those walls to come down, if you want to get behind those walls, it's going to be by finding a way to ask someone to consider these ideas on their own in quiet contemplation. Now, that's not always possible, and sometimes, yeah, you do want to engage in conversation. I think it's very important as a gateway for this. And this is where, if you watch my videos on YouTube, I think I provide an excellent example of staying calm using nonviolent communication and driving a conversation with the Socratic dialogue techniques of asking questions that lead someone to a different conclusion than the one they thought was correct at the beginning of the conversation. And I just want to lower the expectations, because, you know, you can walk someone through a Socratic dialogue and prove that government is illegitimate, unethical, and holding back humanity if you want to do that. But if you're just trying to get them engaged, just trying to get them thinking, get them to that point where they can take some of that conversation, some of that information, maybe they can read something or start watching videos where they can do it on their own. They can do it alone. They can do it where they can readjust their worldview without the peer pressure or social pressure of doing that in front of other people.
Even what I was going to say.
Okay.
No, yeah, I just wanted to mention that watching some of those videos where you confront people, I sometimes seeing them squirm when you highlighted the fact that they didn't know as much as they thought they did. But I guess that's if it makes them go away and consider, but I am on that front. I just tell people why they're wrong sometimes, which seems easier to do. Although I think,
well, again, so if I may go back though, this is again the strategy of localization makes this a lot easier, because when you're trying to push an ideology, you're pushing an ideology on someone, as opposed to saying, hey, I've got this idea for practical policy that makes everyone's life better immediately, of localizing government. So when someone comes to you and says, well, I think government should do X, the typical libertarian response is no, and let me argue with you, and I can prove it, and we're going to debate and play the zero-sum game. I'm right, you're wrong, thinking of it as a political conversation. And if you say instead, look, so if government should do X, are you okay with government doing X just at your community level? Are you okay with government doing X in such a way that you don't force other people who don't want to be a part of that system into your system? Are you okay with when government is doing X in your community that you don't force it on your neighboring community? And if you answered yes to all of those questions, congratulations, you're a libertarian. And if you want to take this first step in the right direction with us of localizing government, then the Libertarian Party is your party. And this is really hard for a lot of libertarians to get, because we're such analytical thinkers. We really are unusually nerdy that way. We have a weird intellectual strain that sets us apart from the rest of the population. Most people don't think in those terms, and that's fine. So if we get a special vision of how humanity moves forward based on our analysis of government and society and philosophy and violence and nonviolence and freedom, then the way that we take charge and say, look, everybody, this is what we're doing. Here's the practical first step. Can we all do this together? Stop arguing philosophy. Stop trying to debate how many libertarian angels can dance on the head of a pin. It doesn't matter. And that debate actually slows down the process of bringing about a society that can have consensus on taking this first step together. And it's not just an American thing. I think in the United States right now, I'm really honored. This is like the one thing that makes me patriotic, is that we have an opportunity now to fulfill the first American Revolution's promise and overthrow again the world's biggest empire and lead the world forward in freedom. But when we do this in the United States and people go, oh, wow, once again, the United States now is that much more freer, safer, and prosperous because they got rid of their big central government. Every other government around the world is going to be racing to do the same thing, because people everywhere will be demanding this kind of self-determination.
And are you really that's
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. Can you say that again?
Sorry. Are you really that confident? I mean, you seem confident. It sounds like you believe it. You're selling it to me, but are you really that confident that you're on the brink of that?
Well, if you want to hear what I think of a sort of legitimate conservative timeline for this, as for my presidential campaign, I'm not running an educational campaign. I'm running to win. We are running to dissolve the federal government. We will have the executive order in place as a practical way of dissolving the federal government, so that in November, when the American people vote, they know exactly what they are voting on. And if I was a praying man, I would be praying all day and night that before 2020 we get to this black swan moment, that we achieve this extra paradigm shift specifically around dissolving the United States federal government, so we can do it in 2020. But realistically, I don't think that it's it would be unexpected, or I don't think we should settle for less than having a breakout year for the Libertarian Party in 2020 and break 10%. And I think when we stop going, I'm socially liberal and fiscally conservative, I'm the best of both worlds, so the American people go, you mean the best of both shit worlds that we don't want anything to do with? You know, that when we put forth a practical policy that's actually libertarian, that's actually based on our principles, that is a solution as big as the problem, I think we can unite all Americans against the common enemy of big central government. But in 2020, if all we do is plant the flag on this idea that we can have nobody for president, and everybody knew that that was a possibility, I think we can break 10%. And I think if we do that, it means in 24 we'll be competitive and we'll be getting around 25%. And then if the federal government still exists in 28, then that's where I don't think the federal government will be able to maintain its consensus that it should be allowed to continue to exist. And one way or another, I will continue to run until the federal government ceases to exist.
You're up against stuff. There's a lot of people with their nose in the trough. There's some big agencies, there's some big government agencies. You've had a taste of it just in your activism. I've seen you body slammed to the floor by cops, etc. These are big outfits to fuck with.
Yeah, well, some people have said that they won't let me win because I'll get shot first. And if that's the case, so be it. I've risked my life for less worthy causes before, obviously, having volunteered to go to Fallujah in 2004 with the Marines. And, I've been told they won't let you win because they'll steal the election. They'll control the process. And it's true that they can to some degree, but we have so much more accountability for elections now in 2017 than ever before that you really can't cheat the exit polls too much. If Hillary Clinton was polling at 90% the day of the election and the next day they said, oh, no, never mind, it was Donald Trump by a hair, no one would believe it. Government would have no credibility. And I know that we're not going to win with this platform 34% to the old party's 33. We're going to win when we have an overwhelming majority and a clear public mandate. And I think we're going to have to win the exit polls, and we're going to have to win with something like 60% in order to be able to go in there and say we have an undeniable public mandate. The federal government is no longer allowed to exist with the consent of the American people.
Okay.
Yeah, but I thought it would be a good question to wrap up.
Okay, no, then I'll cut in with this one. I mean, back on practicalities. Then one of the things that I get asked. I'm a Scottish Libertarian Party, and whenever I'm campaigning or wherever I'm doing anything, I get asked. I'm a former veteran myself, and I get asked by veterans, guys I used to serve with, what are you going to do for veterans? And I have to say, well, look how you feel. If you think if it's entitled to government money, it's veterans because they were working on behalf of government. They went to their deaths on behalf of government. They got injured on behalf of government. So they should be entitled to government money. But trying to explain to them, well, look, the government doesn't have any money. The only money that government has is money force from people who agree with the war in the first place. So why should they have to fork out when they didn't agree that the war should have taken place in the first place? What you must have had questions like this yourself. What's the practicalities? What can we do? I mean, anything I can. But what are we going to do, say, to fellow veterans when they ask you that question?
Yeah, well, in the United States, we have a really great answer to that. I can't speak to universally if this would be appropriate for every country, but we have the Department of Veterans Affairs here as a federal agency in the United States that provides medical care to veterans, and it's a disaster. Notoriously so. We have a veteran suicide epidemic in America with at least 22 veterans committing suicide every single day. And if you don't think it's because of the VA, let me tell you my story. I went in there when I was getting back from Iraq, or after I got back, and I told them that I was having trouble sleeping. I walked out of there with a little paper bag, 5 prescriptions, 3 of which had suicide listed as a side effect. They are literally killing veterans on behalf of the United States pharmaceutical industry, keeping safe alternatives like marijuana, MDMA, and mushrooms from being available to treat PTSD in ways that would be more effective than most any of the pharmaceuticals. And they don't have suicide as a side effect. So how do we address this in the United States? when we liquidate the federal government, we spin off the VA as a private institution. Now, most people think of privatization in terms of government privatization, and that's a terrible thing where they take broadly available public resources and put them in the hands of a few rich assholes. In this case, we have the bureaucracy of the VA, which is in the hands of a few rich assholes who pull the strings on the bureaucrats and the politicians. And what I mean when I say privatize is ethical privatization, putting resources in the hands of people who have an actual interest in them. So you take the VA out of their hands and privatize it as an independent institution and give every veteran in America one ownership voting share. There's no reason the VA shouldn't exist. It just cannot continue to be funded by taxes. So you spin it off, you put the resources that are there, you give it some portion to make sure that it has a good start. Hopefully we have so much money when we dissolve the federal government that is stolen from us for so long that we can fund it in a way. Hopefully we can fund it until this generation of American veterans is no longer with us. And when you put those resources in the hands of veterans, I guarantee you're not going to have 22 veterans committing suicide every day.
Right. We've got a couple of from the audience. One would Chapman. So would you be fine rejecting immigrants into one's historical neighborhood enforced by government? I think he means supposing it was on the local level. Supposing you get, which by the left and the right do frequently say they think government should be local. And to agree with that. Saying on the then are you fine with people or even ejecting immigrants now that it's on the local level? I guess he's not for.
Well, you know, I'm not for borders based on government lines at all. They should be based on private property. So when you say, do I support the right of a community to expel people or decide who comes in? Yeah, I absolutely support that right. Do I support a policy that's discriminatory or that is, you know, limiting in some larger scale on a community level? I don't support it. But, you know, if you come together and you make your gated community and private property and you say, you know, no people with big noses allowed, you know, okay, I'm not gonna come on your property and violate your rights that way. So if that's the case, you know, I support your right to do it. That doesn't mean I necessarily support you doing it. I would want to live somewhere where I'm able to bring anybody I want right up to my house. So like where I live in Arizona, I have 10 acres. I think it's offensive that there are government borders in between me and other people who I would want to invite onto my property, that I can't invite anyone on the world to come and travel freely there. But I would also respect the right of, you know, that person. They don't, you know, community to exclude that person, and they might have to go around your territory if you have enough people with their private property who come together who want to make an exclusive community. So I think generally that's a bad idea. I think you're generally at an economic disadvantage when you discriminate against people like that, when you keep people out. But if you're talking about like a residential community, you know, you're talking about, you know, a few people at the end of a cul-de-sac who want to have, you know, their little area with their own security system. You want to talk about even, you know, maybe a city-state of people who come together and say, you know, we want to be economically tied as we're geographically tied, and you can't come into our system unless, you know, unless you buy into it. You know, that's okay too.
Sure, I can ask another one before you. Okay. Touch just briefly, if we can, on Russia Today. I know you worked briefly with Russia Today, and I just enjoyed the that Russia Today, both in America and here in Europe and the UK, is that it's that Russia Today is this state-funded propaganda machine. What was your experience working with Russia, and how did you part ways in the end? Was that government again?
Yeah, well, overall it was a great experience, and you know, it's some people will hold this against me and say, yeah, you were to work for the government. Yeah, well, I used to, like, you know, torture people in Iraq you know, on behalf of the American government. And if you're going to be on the airwaves, if you're going to be on TV, if you're going to be using the dollar in any way, you're participating in the government system. And my understanding of RT is that it's the Russian government poking the American government in the eye. And I'm there poking the American government in the eye anyway. So if I get to be part of that finger, you know, for a little period of time, I think that's a great opportunity in the tradition of the American founders getting foreign help to overthrow the British Empire in the first American Revolution. Similarly, in this final American Revolution, those of us true American patriots are going to need a lot of help from foreign powers. And I think overall, Russia is really more of a satellite of the American empire. Its economy is about a 30th of the size of the United States. So it's really not that significant in global terms. And my experience working with RT was awesome. It was very positive. They entirely respected my right to editorial control that I you know, negotiated for in my contract. And you know, we parted ways because I think they realized that a true libertarian is not just against the American government, but against the very concept of government. And I was as outspokenly critical of Putin as you know, as anybody else in American media, and you know, made a very deliberate point to say, I'm not a Russian puppet. I'm letting they're giving me this platform. I'm going to share my entire honest worldview with you, and that's what I did. So I was critical of Putin, especially before the midterm elections that he stole so egregiously in 2011. And I think that I was let go somewhat timed with the next round of elections in Russia.
I have another libertarian. As a libertarian
Hold on,
for
sorry,
almost 5 years.
Hold on, can you say that again? You were breaking up, please.
As a libertarian for almost 5 years, you, Adam, helped come out of my shell and be more active in the libertarian movement. Have you got any advice for a 5-year libertarian of their shell and coming out their shell and becoming more active?
Well, if I may answer that question first by backing up and saying something that I think is very important that not a lot of libertarians get, which is that this is not the eternal struggle between freedom and tyranny. This is one step in human evolution. Excuse me, that we get to lead the way forward, and we get to take this step.
Here? Sorry.
What?
Sorry. I think you just shocked him with what you said.
Oh. No. So we are here to bring about this important next step in human evolution. And like I said, in the United States, we eliminate the federal government, the state governments, we get government down to the counties. We're done. You know, we don't have to do anything at that point. Libertarianism is kind of irrelevant to the political conversation because government is already voluntary and more or less at the community level. So I wouldn't think about, you know, what do I do to, you know, to be a better libertarian so much as how do I help humanity take this step forward? And for some people, it's not going out and talking to people. If that's not your skill set, that's okay. You know, it might be talking to people on the internet. It might be raising money for other organizations. It might be writing. It might be, you know, doing research. It might be helping with video production or helping some other independent media campaign. You know, it could be any of those things. So don't necessarily think that what you have to do is what I do and, you know, go out and talk to people on the street and try to, you know, free people's minds that way. But if that's what you want to do, if that's what you find most satisfying, then just start doing it. You know, learn, like my book Freedom, if it's 100 pages, if you master that material, you don't need anything more to take into a conversation with a statist. If it gets more complicated than that, you know, you need to stop and go, all right, we're gonna Google that stuff. We're gonna look that up. But you just get out and you do it and you start talking to people and you get better and you get better and you get better. And if you stay in the love that's behind this message, you don't argue with people, be Socratic, be asking questions, be engaged in a positive way. Don't, you know, be insulting or demeaning, any of those things. If you want to watch my videos on YouTube for some examples of how to do it, a lot of people have said that those have helped and you know, how to especially use the Socratic dialogue and how to talk to strangers. But yeah, I hope you see the bigger picture and understand that this is our generation, this is our time, this is our opportunity. We get to lead this huge step forward in human progress, and everybody gets their own role in that. Don't be confined to thinking about it in political terms or activism terms or anything like this, because it could be that maybe your role is as an entrepreneur, and maybe, I mean, the guy who came up with Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto, Satoshi, maybe he was maybe he was thinking, gee, what can I do to help the libertarian cause more than anything else? And he goes, yeah, we're gonna take down the monetary system by creating our own digital cryptocurrency. It could be something beautiful like that. So find what's good for you, what's based on your love, your talent, your capabilities, and figure out a way to incorporate that into your life as an activist that's sustainable, so you don't burn out, and that you can keep doing it in a way that's adding value to your life as well.
Yeah, for example, I hear that Scottish Liberty are always looking for people to share their media. I mean, if you're not going to share one of our podcasts. But yeah, and I do recommend that if you're talking to people, is a really overcome social and some additional social skills and things like that. So I think that it's not the only way to help, but sometimes if you've got a good motivation, things scary, more appealing. If you don't think about it just as, oh, I'm going to spread the message of liberty, but oh, I'm going to meet up with some libertarians that are more experienced with me, and I'll make new friends. I'll maybe take some risks I'm not used to and speak to strangers, and I'll discover that the world is a much less scary place. So,
do you have your final question?
Yeah,
ready?
One of the interesting and maybe unique things is there's a section called True Personal Freedom, and one of the sections launches with emotional slavery. Can you tell us about emotional slavery and what we can learn about that to have liberty from inside out?
Well, one of the most influential books that I've ever read is Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. And I should have mentioned that in response to the last question. If you want to be that much better of a communicator, understanding the process of nonviolent communication, the methodology specifically around that is very important. And one of the most important tenets of nonviolent communication is understanding that you are responsible for your own emotions. No one can make you feel anything. And in that regard, in that realm, we are very careful to use language that is precise. So I can't ever say to someone in a conversation, you made me feel this way. I can say, when you did this, then I felt this way. And that's a very important distinction. And it gets to the idea of emotional freedom, which is that no one gets to control the state of your mind but you. People can put stimuli in front of you. They can affect your physical world. They can even cause you physical pain or harm or deprivation. And ultimately, it is still your choice as to whether or not you're going to be happy, or you're going to be satisfied, or you're going to be content and focused and moving forward in a centered Zen sense of being your truest self. And what happens with how human beings actually fail to live up to this, because we all do, we all, allow the stimuli to control us. We allow other people to control our emotions. So does government. Government definitely preys on this feature of human nature and uses it against us. They provoke emotional responses in order to control people. So when you understand that, when you can stay attuned to that, it can liberate you from that emotional control of government. And a lot of this relates to politicians giving speeches, the mainstream media interacting with police, the imposition of new laws, things like that. And when you are able to respond to those stimuli, those changes in your environment from a perspective of, I own myself. I own my mind. No one gets to decide my internal choice but me. That's emotional freedom. And that's a gift that you get to give people. You know, it's something that we don't talk about enough as really inherently linked to libertarianism, but it is one of the ways that libertarianism, when you really embrace it fully and live by it, again, possibly an impossible ideal, it really does make your life better, and you get to live more free as a result of this understanding.
Excellent. Adam, we don't want to be on your time much longer. Just
Capitalism.
that we want to thank you for joining us. It's been an absolute privilege and a thrill. And I think I would say you're certainly one of the best guests we've had on the show. And I would love it if you would agree to maybe come back on and talk to us again at some time in the future.
Oh, I would love to. In fact, we're planning a European tour, which is going to have at least one stop in Scotland for next fall. So I hope there would be a time we can get together on that and help promote that stop. So if you guys know a political science professor, perhaps in Edinburgh, who would like to host us on the 2018 European Freedom Tour, let me know. We'll make that happen. I'd really appreciate some help with that. But we are getting organized with that starting in January, and I'm really excited because I speak 5 languages: French, German, Arabic, Spanish, and Scottish. Just kidding. English. So I've given speeches in German before, and Spanish is my best of those. So my goal before this European tour is to get good at all of those languages enough to be able to deliver a speech in them. We are hitting Beirut and Palestine as well on that tour. We have someone working on the Arabic translation of Freedom right now, and hopefully we'll have printed versions of the translations in every native language that we hit on that tour. We're going to do 40 cities in 3 months. So I think we have about 15 languages in all of those cities, and we want to get translations done for all and be giving speeches in 5 languages. Really looking forward to that. So hopefully you can have me back on before that, and sometime after the this convention tour that we've got coming up, organizing for the Libertarian Party. So thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it.
We wish you every success with that.
Yeah, fantastic. Is there anything you'd like to share before you go? Anything you need to add, or you're critical to find your book?
Well, yeah, I would just say go to thefreedomline.com. I'm sure these guys will include the link. It's thefreedomline.com. You can get my book for free there in every digital format, including audiobook. You can find all of my places on social media. You can find my YouTube channel, but screw YouTube. We're getting away from YouTube. DTube, steemit.com. That's the future. Blockchain-based social media. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. If you're listening still right now, it's thefreedomline.com. And thanks for being part of this movement.
Into the Liberty Podcast. Until next time, be libertarians.
Don't be righty
or lefty.